Welcome in the latest episode of that SEC podcast. I'm your host, Michael Bratton. I go by SEC Mike on Twitter. And that is not Cousin Shade. It is our good buddy, Athlon Sports Senior Editor, Stephen Lassan, here to preview week one of SEC football. How's it going, Stephen?
Mike, the four best words I can probably ever mention on this podcast. College football is back. 4 games last weekend. We've got a full slate. That was the appetizer. So I'm fired up and ready to go for week one. Let's get after it.
Yeah, no doubt, Stephen. And the only thing that makes it better, head on over to MyBookie, presenting sponsor of the show, MyBookie online sportsbook. Just type in mybookie.ag today. Put in that promo code, that SEC. That's THAT SEC over at mybookie.ag. Stephen, they're willing to match all initial deposits up to 50% of your initial deposit, all the way up to $1,000 with a minimum of 50 put in. So again, Stephen went 2-0 on his picks last week. Again, we're trying to warn you guys, don't listen to Shane and I, fade us, but get locked in with Stephen on his picks here.
I think that's a good place to announce my retirement, right? 2-0, make money. So yeah, I'm looking forward to making some picks later this week on our show. Hopefully we can keep it going, right? We can win the good folks some extra spending cash.
Right. So if you
maybe Cousin Shane can use our picks and go get Cracker Barrel, right?
If you missed the announcement last week, so Stephen's going to be joining us 2 times a week this football season, and it's not going to cost you any Cousin Shane. So we're just going to double up. Stephen's going to make his predictions on every single SEC game Wednesday night. So this is just, we'll preview the games here. Stephen will pick them on Wednesday, and then Shane and I will still pick our games like we normally do on Thursday. But just, instead of 2 idiots, let's listen to the knowledgeable one on Wednesday night to get your bets in at MyBookie.
You might change your opinion on that once I go 2 and 10 this weekend or something. So, hey, I'm trying to keep the good vibes going. Let's win the good folks some cash and Cousin Shane some Cracker Barrel gift cards along the way.
Right. And so I have to ask you about this, Stephen. We got a great show lined up. Again, we're going to preview week one in the SEC, but we just had week 0. Florida State's already went down. That brought a smile to my face, a top 10 team getting beaten by an unranked ACC team. I mean, how glorious was that, Stephen? But really, it kind of emphasizes what something that I've been trying to express all offseason. We cannot get enamored with these transfers, first-year players. That's what Florida State is, because they've lost so much talent to the NFL, and they struggled mightily in week 1. I want to kick it over here, Stephen, real quick. Clip of Mike Elko, Texas A&M head coach, because watching Florida State struggle, particularly on offense, and their allegedly elite defensive line getting pushed around by Georgia Tech. And then I heard Mike Elko this morning talk about just the challenges of getting a team ready for week 1. I want to ask you about something on the other side.
Mike, you alluded to it a moment ago, but just how difficult has your job become, and all coaches in college football, with all these changes where you are looking at 8 different types of film? It's hard to predict what Denbrock wants to do with Riley and as you get ready for this one.
Yeah, I think in an opener, it's always challenging. I think you've got to, create a plan on both sides of the ball that has enough versatility, because you're going to have to adapt. You can't walk into, you go into week 10 and you can kind of talk in certainties. You go into week 1 and you're really not talking in any certainties. Everything you're talking is, I think, maybe could look like this. You do the best you can to come up with the best guesses you can make on what it will be and what it'll be about. But I think you have to be very flexible with the plans you create, because you got to be ready to adjust. The whole opener is about adjustments and what you can do and what you can adjust on the fly to give yourself the best opportunity as the game goes on to kind of feel how it's going and be able to have practiced enough and be prepared enough that you can go in the direction you need to go to be successful.
So, Steve, basically what I'm picking up from Coach Elko there is just all the variables, and that's true for any college football team. That's the beauty of it, with roster turnover significantly higher than the NFL, obviously. But it's compounded by the portal and NIL and all this. And I thought that was really showcased in that week 0 game. Florida State, again, lost 24-21. So they only scored 21 points, Stephen. They averaged 34.6 points last season and 32 against ACC competition. Georgia Tech allowed over 29 points per game against ACC competition, yet it was flip-flopped where Georgia Tech, I don't want to say shut them down, but really, exposed some flaws in Florida State. And, I've got a list here of teams and position groups that could be an issues for SEC teams week 1 here. But would you agree with, basically the point being that it's more difficult than ever to kind of project what these teams are going to be heading into a season?
100%, Mike. It is very difficult. It's way more challenging than ever before. I can tell you, as the person who puts together all the preseason rankings and predictions and position rankings, it is a lot harder than ever before when we're putting together that preseason magazine at Athlon Sports. I mean, you're guessing how transfers are going to fit in. I mean, just by it's hard when it's one. It's harder when you're looking at a lineup that may feature 5 or 6 on one side of the ball and a couple on the other side, like you mentioned with Florida State. I mean, it's interesting to compare. Florida State had 8 returning starters this year. Georgia Tech had 12. A little bit more continuity too. I mean, old SEC friend Haynes King at quarterback compared to DJU for Florida State. So I think every year just feels so much more sort of mysterious than ever before. And I think that element of the unknown, more so than ever, kind of creeps into preseason. It's going to creep into the regular season. And I think that sort of gets at kind of what I think we talked a little bit about last week is this season's going to be more unpredictable than ever. You've got all these new teams moving into conferences, the 12-team playoff. There's so much more unknown and unpredictability than ever before. So I 100% agree with what Mike Elko was saying there.
Hey, shout out real quick. Cousin JR, he gifted a membership to Faith Dobbs. JR, he does it every show. So Mr. Moneybags over there. But thank you so much, Faith and JR, for being members to the channel. But so let's stick with A&M there, Stephen, because that's the one on the top of my list. And again, I'm not saying A&M's going to be awful or anything like that, but just the point being, there's a lot of turnover all across, obviously, the coaching staff, but the transfer portal as well. And you compound that by the fact that we've got allegedly a top 10 team. Again, I'm not buying the Notre Dame hype, but let's say Notre Dame is top 10, and let's say Florida is better, kind of like I anticipate they will be, having to go on the road to Gainesville. How difficult or how concerned, I guess is really what I'm asking you here, Stephen. How concerned are you that the Aggies, again, I'm not saying they're going to be bad, but it could be a rough start to the season for them?
I'm not as concerned about Texas A&M. I think for number one, I think there's a pretty solid foundation returning, on defense. And also I think maybe with Florida State, and I think to use Florida State and compare them to Texas A&M, I think like if we're looking at A&M's like top transfers and we see a Nick Scorton, I think it's probably a little bit easier to sort of like drop an edge rusher into the defensive line and have him go after than say, you've got to try and mesh a new quarterback, new receivers, some pieces on the offensive line, running backs. There's a lot of continuity there. You do have a lot of new. So I think anytime there is an element of new to this, I think you certainly have to be worried. I don't know if I'm as like after watching Florida State, I don't know that my concern level is raised for Texas A&M. That could change, of course, come Saturday at like 10 o'clock after that game ends. But I'm actually pretty confident in A&M. Hint, hint for this weekend's picks. So.
Hey, Michael Riley says, Stephen, it looks like you can count to 11. Maybe you could be Florida special teams coach down there.
I heard they have that mat now, so I think I might be out of a job. But yeah, I can count to 11. I can assure you that.
All right, well, how about this unit, Stephen? A South Carolina offense. And again, I'm not sitting here saying you're awful or anything, but transfer running back, new quarterback, a lot of new weapons at receiver, offensive line. So again, I'm taking all that, and then I'm looking at a trip to Kentucky, a week 3 hosting LSU. What is the level of concern that South Carolina's offense could be a work in progress that first 3 weeks of the season?
Maybe a little bit more. I think if we're using Florida State as kind of the example here, and I want to trying to make this clear. I'm trying not to overreact to one game because Georgia Tech could be a lot better than we think, and Florida State could just be a little bit worse than we thought coming into this year. I think what's kind of, when I think about these scenarios, Mike, I'm almost like thinking, what position would give me the most anxiety if I was counting on a transfer? And I almost go offensive line, receivers, and quarterback on offense. I think it's probably a little bit easier to drop in a running back like Rocket Sanders. But I think with South Carolina, I think what would sort of like raise my concern level is like new quarterback. I would assume some sort of tweak to the offense to fit what Sellers does best. And you have to go on the road to Kentucky in week 2 with LSU after that. Like, I think that schedule with all the new pieces and some of the questions and some of the defensive fronts they could face, especially against Kentucky, probably a little bit higher for me on South Carolina after watching Florida State.
Now, how about, again, this might be an obvious one, but how about a LSU and their defense, Stephen, opening, of course, against Southern Cal in Las Vegas, Nichols? I mean, surely they won't be a test, but then going on the road at South Carolina, any cause for concern that this defense could start a little bit slower? I mean, we all get overhyped. Stephen, you say you're trying not to overreact. That's all we do over here.
Yeah.
Is we overreact. You know, if they shut down Southern Cal, these fans are going to be buying their tickets to the college football playoff right off the bat. But if they struggle, or could they struggle, what's the level of concern that LSU's defense could start the season a little bit slow?
I think you kind of, I would be, I guess, tip my hand a little bit here. USC has some real position concerns coming into this game. So if LSU's defense dominates, I'm going to be leaving this game going, I don't know what to make of USC's offense or LSU's defense at this point. I think if LSU's defense is really bad, it's just kind of a continuation of last season. I think what would sort of give me a little bit of confidence if I'm LSU, like, it's pretty much the same like cast of characters from last season, like 6 returning starters, and a lot of these guys that you kind of project into the lineup were mostly on the team last year. There's obviously some transfers up front and in the secondary that are going to play. So I'm not as concerned about LSU's defense, but I think we're going to get a really, really good kind of idea of where this group is after playing USC, depending on how that game plays out.
How about Kentucky offense? That's another one on my radar, Stephen, with Brock Vandegrift, Chip Trainium, who's out now, I guess, for the first couple games here. We like what they have at receiver, but again, the offensive line has not been the big blue wall that they had that reputation for years and years. And playing South Carolina, critical game, playing Georgia, week 3 of the season, any concern that Kentucky's offense could start really slow?
Yes. So I think, first of all, I don't know that we can read too much into this game against Southern Miss because their defense was awful last year. I think they changed coordinators and it might be a little bit better this year, but I don't know that we'll know a whole lot. And you start looking, okay, new offensive coordinator, new quarterback. What's the running game situation? As you mentioned, Chip Trainium is hurt, Sumi Kangbe and some other running backs. I think the freshman also, Wilcox is going to step in there too. So there's a lot of new there for Kentucky. And I think I'm probably, with all the new pieces, I'm going to leave this game probably a little bit uncertain about how I feel against a really bad Southern Miss defense. So after watching Florida State's offense struggle, I probably would say the same thing about Kentucky. Like it may be a work in progress early in the year.
How about Tennessee's defensive backs? Not the defense overall, Stephen, but NC State and Grayson McCall there, solid player at Coastal. And really, this might be looking too far ahead, but at Oklahoma, Jackson Arnold and all those weapons he's got to work with, how confident are you that Tennessee's defensive backs will not cost them either one of these games?
I'm concerned about Tennessee secondary. I think it kind of goes back to what you and I were talking about this offseason, Mike, which is they lost a lot of pieces, but they weren't very good. So what does that mean when you're basically changing over the entire personnel? Is it that maybe these guys fit the scheme a little bit better? Are they going to have a little bit more talent going forward? So it's an interesting kind of mix that Tennessee has. I think just all the new pieces on the back end, I think it is going to take some time for those to fit. And I should say, I think we saw one thing in that Florida State game and Georgia Tech that would concern me: tackling. Early in the season, I think it was an issue for Florida State, especially in that game on Saturday. I think we may see that early in the year. So like your linebackers are out of position, your secondary maybe doesn't tackle maybe as well as they think. So yeah, I think all the new pieces early in the season McCall, Jackson Arnold, I'd be a little bit concerned if I was Tennessee.
How about Alabama's defensive back? Same thing, Stephen. We've talked about this quite a bit. Western Kentucky's got a solid passing attack. South Florida, Alex Golish, and then Phil Longo, week 3, and then obviously Georgia, maybe the best quarterback in the country, Carson Beck, and that's, if he's not the best, he's probably number 2. You know what I mean? So I think not that it's I'm wildly concerned, but these are some real challenges here, don't you think?
Yes, I would be worried. I mean, I try not to overreact. I don't want to overreact to just what we saw, but I do think with a group that has a bunch of freshmen and transfers likely to step into the lineup with a new defensive coordinator, I think that is cause for early concern, especially when you see the passing games that you see. I mean, Western Kentucky, one of the better passing games in Conference USA. You mentioned South Florida with Alex Golish. I mean, that's 4 pretty solid quarterbacks right out of the gate. I think Carson Beck's the best in the country. And I think Byron Brown from South Florida will be one of the top G5 quarterbacks this season as well. So I'd be concerned.
And then the last one I wanted to ask you about here, Stephen, Texas offense. Again, I get it. Quinn Ewers, Sarkisian. I'm not trying to make light of their running backs going down, but that's a little bit of a concern as well. But just the fact that they're adding all these transfers at receiver, and it's an outstanding transfer class, top 5 transfer class. But hell, I think Florida State's had a top transfer class too, and it didn't look it. And again, most of these games, Texas, they may not even need a receiver to beat Colorado State and UTSA and ULM and all this. But what about Michigan, week 2? Could that be a concern if, say, the receivers are just not quite on the same page as Quinn Ewers just yet?
100%, Mike. I think it is kind of an early concern for me in Texas, and just seeing how this group sort of meshes with Quinn Ewers right out of the gate. I mean, you don't have a whole lot of time for this group to mesh. I mean, certainly they've been working all offseason in the spring and fall. And the 3 guys that they brought in at receiver through the portal are going to be big-time contributors. But I think we saw, like with using Florida State as the example, it may take some time for some of these passing games to find their rhythm. And you're talking about, big-time contributors stepping in at starting spots for Texas, and you go on the road to week 2 to play a really, really good Michigan defense. I think after what we saw with the concern about maybe slow starts by transfers, I might be a little bit more concerned if I was Texas.
Right. Well, I'll tell you what I'm not concerned about, Stephen, and that is our partnership with Manscaped. Manscaped is back for another year. Shane's trying to get me to shave my head about every other episode, Stephen, on one of these lousy bets that I have. And if I ever do it, Stephen, the only blade I'm going to be using is Manscaped, using that promo code, that SEC, that's THAT-SEC, to get 20% off your entire order and free shipping over at Manscaped. Stephen, they sent us the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Beard Hedger. I use it for my beard all the time. That's why this beard looks so good. It's got nothing to do with me. It's got all to do with Manscaped. Again, head on over to Manscaped, put in that promo code, that SEC, 20% off your entire order and free shipping over at Manscaped, Stephen, with that promo, that SEC. Now, there's some other position groups, though, Stephen, that I really wanted to ask you about. And these, I think, we've been talking quite a bit about them, but I'm not overly concerned because of the schedule, if that makes sense. And I'm looking at Oklahoma's offensive line, of course. Again, I'm not saying they're going to be like the world's best offensive line after 3 weeks of play, but, if they were playing Notre Dame week 1 and at Florida week 3, that would be a real issue. But because you got Temple, Houston, and Tulane all at home right out the gate, again, where is your level of concern with Oklahoma's offensive line given the schedule that they play?
I think the first 2 weeks, I think they're going to be fine. Temple and Houston, I think from a defensive front perspective, probably won't give them a ton of trouble. The other side of this is, let's just say Friday night, Oklahoma's offensive line really struggles against Temple. That is a 5-alarm fire. We'll get to that later on when we talk about Temple. But I think Tulane is actually going to be a really good test for this Oklahoma offensive line. I think this Tulane defensive front is maybe the best in the American Athletic Conference, and John Summerall, of course, is their head coach, and I think he's pretty highly of him as a head coach and a defensive mind. So I think the first 2 weeks you're not so worried. I think it gives them a little bit of time almost to ramp up to that Tennessee game. Like, you get 2 easy games, you get a little bit better of a test, then you get James Pierce and that Tennessee defensive front for Oklahoma.
And then another one, Stephen, again, Ole Miss defense, kind of the same deal, where if they struggle against Furman, that probably means they gave up 10 points. TSU, I mean, they should blow this is such a joke. I mean, they're going to score probably 40 to 50 points per game the first four games. Their offense I'm talking about. So it may be, even if they struggle, I don't know anybody will notice it till September 28th. Would you agree with that?
Yes, I definitely agree with you, Mike. I mean, if Ole Miss has a close game through the first 4 weeks of the season, or the defense struggles or the offense struggles, that'd be a little concerning. There is one element that I think we probably should mention with some of these position groups, and I think Ole Miss's schedule is kind of the perfect kind of point for this, is some of these teams that are playoff contenders, I really wonder what's the rotation going to be like? Like, are you going to go deeper into your rotation earlier in the season? Like, Walter Nolan, does he only play like X amount of snaps? Like, is it shorter because you have the playoff potential? I mean, you obviously have to get there, but you also have to think ahead a little bit if you're Lane Kiffin or Kirby Smart. Like, do you spell some of these guys a little bit earlier in the season? So that might be something to watch too, as we're thinking about the performance of some of these groups. But I'm not too worried based upon that schedule for that Ole Miss defense.
And the same thing for Missouri defense, Stephen, with I just laugh looking at this schedule every time. But the first month of the season, I don't know that they need a defense because again, they'll probably be scoring 50 points per game on these teams. They're all at home. What is it? Murray State, Buffalo, BC, Vanderbilt, all at home. So the schedule lends itself to, even if it takes a month to get the defense going, but Missouri should be fine.
Yeah, they really should. This is a schedule that's really kind of almost tailored for Missouri to figure out their defensive kind of question marks as they go into the season. Really probably won't know how good this defense is until October 5th against Texas A&M. I mean, if Missouri gives up a ton of points early in the season, it could be to Boston College. Boston College has a pretty good quarterback in Thomas Castellanos, but if they're giving up 30 points a game to Murray State, Buffalo, BC, or Vanderbilt, that is, to use a term I've already used, a five-alarm fire from Missouri.
And last one, Stephen, would you say the same thing about Auburn's offense and their new additions at receiver, where, Alabama A&M, Cal, New Mexico, all at home, right out the gate. Auburn's got time to figure this out. And they shouldn't be figuring. This is Hugh Freeze. This is the quarterback's back, the running back's back. I'm not saying they're going to be awful, but I can't imagine that, even if they struggle, I don't know that anyone will even notice.
Yeah, I think so too, Mike. I think California in week 2 might be, last year's game in Berkeley was kind of tricky. It was a close one, but I think Auburn probably doesn't need to fire on all cylinders to win those games. Keep in mind, California is still paying Peter Sermon to call defensive plays, so they're probably going to be just fine on September 7th.
Mm-hmm. All right. So another one. Hey, Stephen, back for another year. We're so pleased to have PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports. They're a member for the show for, I believe, the 4th season in a row. You head on over to PrizePicks today, put in that promo code SEC. Stephen, they're willing to match your initial deposit up to $100 over at PrizePicks. And why we bring that up, I threw these Stephen's way, but PrizePicks, so it's weekly is what they typically do, but before the season begins, at least for SEC teams, they have season totals for passing yards per player, receiving yards, and rushing yards on a few select players. And I threw this Stephen's way, and I asked him to share his favorites. So what are your favorites of the ones I sent over via the PrizePicks over more than, less than for the season totals?
Mike, I think there is some good value at the quarterback spot if you're looking at passing yards over on PrizePicks. So I actually found, I think, 6 quarterbacks I like to go over on. Now this is assuming like perfect case scenario, nobody gets hurt, nothing crazy happens. But Carson Beck, going for more than, just over, 3,000, 349 yards this season. I think with a tougher schedule, maybe Carson Beck is relied on a little bit more. Georgia's also navigating some early injuries at running back. So I think Carson Beck kind of in pursuit of that Heisman Trophy. You look last year, just under 4,000 yards. That's, you have to take out the SEC championship game and the bowl game for these numbers, but I like it. I think he can easily go over 3,500 again. I also like Jackson Dart. At PrizePicks, they've got him just over 3,000 passing yards. You look last season, he was over 364. I think with the addition of Juice Wells, and not to mention with what they lost at running back, certainly Lane Kiffin's not going to abandon the run game. But at the same time, I think you could easily see this team relying a little bit more on Jackson Dart, especially in his third year as a starter. So give me Carson Beck, Jackson Dart more than on the passing yards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll throw out four more, Mike, real quick, and then I'd like to get your opinion on them. I think these four to me stand out. Like I would be all over just as much as like Carson Beck and Jackson Dart, I guess. But Jalen Milroe, more than 2,749 yards. Connor Wigman, more than 2,450 yards. Nico, 2,500. Easily. Give me the more than on that one. And Brady Cook, 2,900 passing yards. Give me more than on that one.
Steven, you're starting to sound like Cousin Shane. You like everybody over, but that is exactly, I think, what these fans want to hear, and I agree. I mean, the only concern, and this is a slight concern, and quite frankly, I think this is a concern that some of these fans would take, Steven. Let's say Carson Beck or Brady Cook or Jackson Dart. Again, not that you really need to save a quarterback, but if you're crushing somebody by 4 touchdowns in the fourth quarter, lessons were probably learned by the Florida State injury. I can't recall when that occurred in that game, but
it was in the first half, I think.
But did they even need to play that guy? You know what I mean?
No, they didn't need to play him to win that game.
It may have cost them a shot at the national championship. You know what I mean? So will that be into the thought process of someone like Kirby Smart, who maybe he lets Carson Beck run out of here for a series or two against one of these garbage teams they got, like UMass, you know what I mean, or Tennessee Tech or something like that. I know Ole Miss has got a deep quarterback room. I could imagine a scenario where Jackson Dart doesn't even play the second half of basically the first month of the season. You know what I mean?
Keep him in bubble wrap, right?
So those would be the only concerns on the more than, less than. But yeah, as long as we're not sitting guys for a long time, particularly that Nico one, not to be a complete homer here, but Josh Heupel has shown. I know last year notwithstanding, but usually when he has a first-year quarterback, the numbers are video game type numbers. So little concern that Nico's is not going to have, at least production-wise, a really good season for Tennessee.
I think Hendon Hooker was around 3,000 passing yards in both of his seasons at Tennessee. Last year obviously was a little different with Joe Milton leading the way, but the hype on Nico is obviously very high. I think he could be a Heisman type dark horse with the type of numbers he could put up in this system. So it just seems like if you think about it, he's a first year quarterback. There are going to be bumps in the roads, but 2,500 for an offense that generally has a 3,000 yard passer seems like, it's like easy money to me. But you did raise an interesting point about the quarterbacks, and I'm kind of reminded thinking we also had this transfer portal later in the season. So there's probably some benefit if you're a head coach to getting some of these guys. I think Gunnar Stockton's in really good space to be the quarterback for Georgia next year. But what about all these other teams? You start thinking do you have to get some of these guys in the game so that they don't transfer at the end of the season too? So man, the intrigue this year with the 12-team playoff and the portal is unlike any other, trying to figure all this out.
Right. Oh, how about the receiving yards from PrizePicks, Steven? Are there any that you're more than or less than confident in?
Mike, I've got 3 that I would take the more than side. Luther Burden is at 1,000 yards. Give me the more than side. I think he's going to make a run at being a finalist for the Heisman Trophy. Maybe he doesn't get there, but I think just based upon who's the best player in college football, I think, pretty obvious to me that Luther Burton's on that list. So give me the more than side of 1,000. Give me the more than side of Trey Harris. He's at 725 in receiving yards. Adding Juice Wells to that sort of kind of complicates the Ole Miss receiving core a little bit. But again, kind of going back to Jackson Dart, I think they may throw a little bit more this year. So give me more than on Trey Harris, 725, and I will take more than on Eugene Wilson at 655. Elijah Badger coming in kind of complicates that Florida receiving core, but I think Eugene Wilson's going to have a breakout year, and that's why I would take the more than side. On the less than side, give me Juice Wells. He is at 675.5 over at PrizePicks. Injuries, I think if you're Ole Miss, I think you can sort of ease him into the season. You have depth at receiver, so I think he's an easy kind of less than pick for me, just because playing time could be a little bit limited early in the year.
Right, and it's there's no confirmation that Juice Wells is even going to go this weekend. Again, it's just one game, but word out of Oxford, Stephen, is they're being very careful with a lot of their guys, with their future NFL type guys, whatever you want to call them, and in limiting contact. They obviously didn't have a spring game. They had a dunk contest and a hot dog eating contest and all that. So I didn't even think about this really, Stephen, but the more I hear about this, I don't want to say red flag, because again, look at Ole Miss schedule. It's a joke. But if we treat the first month of the season like training camp, any level of concern that we're rusty, essentially, like maybe like for Kentucky, maybe we're still trying to figure out who we are, or anything like that. With Furman, MTSU, both at home, Wake Forest on the road, Georgia Southern. That's your first month of the season. Because I have seen this before, Stephen. That's a big thing that happened to 2016 Tennessee. They basically made all these star players. They didn't have to do camp, and then come season, players kept getting injured and things of that nature. Does that concern you at all with Ole Miss?
I think it's a fair concern, Mike. I think it's just an element of the unknown with this team and this sort of like style of building a team now with all the transfers and this new era of college football. There's always, it seems like, one team, and I'm sort of drawing a blank on like who would be a good candidate for this, but it always feels like there's one or two teams every year or two, or maybe every couple years. They don't play any close games. And then when they do, they really have a hard time like trying to figure out how they get like over the hump in those close games. So
Georgia last year, maybe you could throw that.
Yeah. Like until that game is really tight and like you've played a bunch of blowouts, you don't know how things are going to go when things are really kind of tight on the scoreboard. So some interesting, I think the schedule, obviously for Ole Miss, they're going to steamroll through those first couple games, but like, how do you go on the road when you play like South Carolina or when you play Kentucky or someone like that, early in the season with all these new faces and you've played a bunch of blowouts and now you have to respond in a close game? That's going to be interesting to see how that plays out if it gets to that.
Like Cousin Anthony says, what's Lame's Kiffin's excuse going to be this year? You know what?
I think is he still got the Lane Whiffen nickname?
He does until he wins a big game this year, Stephen.
I'd have to wait till October, right?
You're right. All right, final one here on the PrizePicks, Stephen. Rushing yards, more than, less than. Any of those stand out to you?
Mike, these are hard. I think the running backs, it's just such a weird year for running backs in the SEC. So I actually, you kind of talked me into this one. I will go with more than on Rocket Sanders. He is at 675.5 in rushing yards. Obviously, Lenore Sellers will probably have a good chunk of rushing yards, the offensive line being a concern. But former 1,000-yard rusher, if he's anything close to full strength, I think that he's easily going to go past that. And then the others, I would probably go with the less than side on all of these. Like Gavin Sawchuk at Oklahoma's at 900 rushing yards, Marcus Carroll from Missouri at 825, and Jaquindon Jackson at 725. Like all those could be committees. So I think if I'm taking a side, I would just sort of play it as less than, because they're all going to be sharing carries.
Right, yeah, and I think that's kind of the way you look at it. You're not questioning these backs. You're just more questioning the role they'll have. And right back to your point, if we're trying to get to the college football playoff, we're more than likely not going to ride a guy, 25, 30 carries a game. We're going to spread that ball around so that guys can be around come December, January, whenever the playoff is.
Bingo. I think that's exactly it. And I think that, we've already seen, like at Missouri, it looks like Nate Newell's probably going to get the first carry on Thursday night. You have two good running backs. I don't think there's a Cody Schrader production level wise, but you have two really solid running backs. So it's not really a question of like production. It's just that I think in a fantasy sense, going back to my days of covering college fantasy, you're looking at guys splitting carries, which sort of reduces their fantasy value, which thus take the less than side on these prize picks.
Exactly. Well, where you don't take the less than, Stephen, and that's over at HelloFresh, back for another year. And what a tremendous offer they've got for our audience here, Stephen, using the promo code FREE SEC. That's FREE SEC over at HelloFresh, Stephen. They're giving people free breakfast for the entire term that they're signed up over at HelloFresh. Free breakfast for life. You can't beat that, Stephen. When I told Shane I thought he was going to fall out of his chair and jump off of here and go on to HelloFresh and put in that promo code FREE SEC. If not for HelloFresh they're sending us free food anyway. Otherwise, Shane would have quit the show and done it. But again, head on over to HelloFresh, put in that promo code FREE SEC. They're willing to give anybody that puts that in free breakfast item for life at the term of their deal. Stephen, you can't beat that, can you?
Man, Mike, that is such a great deal. As they say, breakfast is the most important meal of the day. So, and hey, like the best part about it is I don't know about anybody else, but I sort of like to have like things kind of like planned out because like I'm in a hurry and like I don't want to stop and I try to fix something. So that's like that's the perfect thing. Put the code in, get that shipped to your house. You get your breakfast taken care of. You don't have to think about it. That's the best part about it.
The only problem is, I think that's why Shane's not here. He's eating his HelloFresh right now. But hey, we ate ours, so we're loaded up to preview Week 1 games here in the SEC, Stephen, and we got 16 games to kind of preview, break down here. So, can you give the folks what is your logic, your breakdown, your previews? Because quite frankly, a lot of these games, are going to be blowouts. We got about 3 or 4 that could be really good games. And who knows, there could be some surprises here. But how are you looking at the preview of these games?
Mike, they're, like you said, 16 games. I think there are probably about 5 of these that could be competitive. So you asked me to kind of rank them in order of like which SEC team was most likeliest to lose all the way to the back. And I think that the hard part about this is there are some FCS, FBS games that are just so one-sided. It really doesn't matter who's 16 and who is 10. They're all going to win. So I tried to approach this as, sort of like margin of victory, like which teams in the SEC are most likely to lose at the top and which ones are likely to win by the highest score at 16 or 15. And also trying to give, fans some of the insight. Like some of these teams, it's, you don't see some of these teams, outside the SEC coming to the SEC and playing very often. So hopefully, Mike, we can give fans kind of what to watch on Saturday too.
Yeah, and again, we've waited so long, Steve. We could be playing a local high school over here against Missouri or something like that, and I'd watch it. You know what?
Scrimmage, yeah, like a flag football game at this point. Give me anything. That was the 4 games this weekend were a nice appetizer, and the best part about it was the 3 of them were close, and like 2 of them that frankly, like the 2 Mountain West games that were during the day before Hawaii, were near upsets. So like we said, New Mexico was going to cover. So yeah, I guess trying to continue to the theme here is unpredictability. We may get some more of it in this weekend. So maybe there will be an upset or 2, but I think based upon the schedule, pretty hard to see some of these SEC teams losing. Yeah.
Well, how about this, Stephen? How about we start with the games that could be the biggest challengers to the SEC? Let's start with the entree here, not the appetizer, so to speak.
Yeah, so let's go to the very top, and the team that I have most likely to lose in the SEC is Vanderbilt. They're playing Virginia Tech. This Virginia Tech team is very good. If you're Vanderbilt, you probably wish you had like Alcorn State or Georgia State in the opener instead of Virginia Tech. But the Hokies finished last year red hot. They were 7-6 overall, but they won 5 out of their last 7 games. You may remember the head coach. It's Brent Pry. He was over at Vanderbilt with James Franklin, and they've really kind of solidified on both sides of the ball. They turned things around after Kyron Drones, the quarterback, took over late, and they also got a lot better on defense last year. You may remember Antoine Powell-Ryland, who was at Florida. He's now at Virginia Tech, one of the best pass rushers in the ACC. So Virginia Tech is trending up. And with Vanderbilt's all the new pieces, kind of like we've kind of questioned how transfers and all these new pieces fit in, this is a pretty tough task for Vanderbilt in week 1.
Oh, yeah. Of all these, laughers of non-conference schedules, what do we do at Vanderbilt? Get us Furman and Georgia Southern and MTSU. What are we doing opening the season against Virginia Tech? We're setting ourselves up for failure here.
Yeah, like I said, they really needed to schedule Alcorn State in week 1 and play Virginia Tech a little later in September to give them some time to figure out all these new pieces. And I mean, some of these teams, and this is true with some of the teams in the middle of the conference, for if it's whatever power conference it is, you sort of scratch your head sometimes when they schedule. It's like Vanderbilt needs to be scheduling 4 layups in non-conference to get to 4-0, so they can just an upset or two gets them into a bowl game. So I like good non-conference games, but if I'm Vanderbilt, I got a schedule to get to a bowl game.
Yeah. All right. So what is number 2 on your list here, Stephen?
It's Miami and Florida. So this is one of the biggest toss-ups. I got no idea what to expect, but I'm really excited to figure out what the heck is going to happen at Gainesville this weekend. And that's because Miami is trending up. We saw what Florida State struggled, lost on Saturday. A lot of people think Miami could be the preseason favorite in the ACC. Well, if they win at Florida, that's a pretty good sign. But this is I know Miami has been hyped over the years. I think they're in a better spot this year. I'm not going to go overboard and trying to hype them up yet as a top 10 type team right now. But they got one of the best quarterbacks in the portal in Cam Ward. They got one of the best running backs in Damian Martinez. Their defensive line is outstanding. Old SEC friend Tyler Barron, he's at Miami. They got Simeon Barrow, a really good defensive tackle from Michigan State this offseason as well. So there are not a lot of glaring concerns here for Miami. If you're Florida and maybe there's one place to attack, it might be the secondary. That's where Miami's got a lot of turnover. They feel pretty good about their secondary, and especially with their defensive front. But that's where, if I'm Florida, I would look to attack here. But this is just to go position by position. Miami's got one of the better quarterbacks, better running backs, great offensive line, good receivers. I mean, this is a big time challenge for Florida. But like I said, also one of the biggest toss-ups of the week.
I think old Billy Napier's tracked me down, if you can hear my dog barking at the door. But again, Stephen, maybe I'm just crazy, which is quite possibly accurate. But I just so much relying on transfers. Miami is with quarterback, you said, with a running back, with hopefully their number 1 receiver, with all these guys on defense. Putting that all together in the swamp, where I think, that fan base has to know that, if they don't win this one, their season could get derailed in a hurry. May not define their season. If they have a winning record in the conference play, this game will be forgotten. But it just seems like it's unlikely to get there if they can't get this first win. So, I don't know. I see what you're saying, and I understand why people would be hyped by Miami. Hell, I think Miami could lose this game and then still win 10 games if they put all the pieces together. And I think that's a realistic scenario, but I don't know. I can't see Miami going in there and beating Florida. I really can't, unless Florida's just awful, which I don't think they are.
So I don't want to tip my hand too much for our Wednesday show, but I agree with your concern about all the transfers, stepping in the swamp, first game of the year. I also think, and maybe I'm not right about this, so I'm open to what Florida fans or Miami fans think. I think this game means more to Florida. I mean, just the way the schedule breaks down, like you said, Mike, I mean, Miami with their schedule, and players and coaches think about it a little differently than we do, but Miami could legitimately be favored in most of their games the rest of the way. They got to play Florida State. They got to play, I think, Virginia Tech. Their schedule's pretty favorable. I think if you're Florida, knowing what happened last year and sort of where this program is, this game, I think, means more to Florida in the swamp.
And then here's a popular misconception. I appreciate Sven bringing it up. He's a big state fan. SEC Mike, you talk about transfers at Miami. Ole Miss has twice the transfers. What about them? See, this is where people are wrong. I don't understand why they. I think it's just because Portal King, all the additions. Ole Miss bringing back 68% of the offensive production, number 2 in the SEC. It's one of the best in the country. So you're adding all these transfers to serve as additions to go with all this. And even the defense, I mean, it's not great like that, but it's not awful either. 46%, number 9 in the SEC. So, I mean, the core of the defense is still there. And again, Ole Miss, if they're winning big, it's not because they're going to have some lockdown defense. I think their defense could be a lot better with Pete Golding. But if Ole Miss wins big, it's going to be because of this offense, which returns 68% of the returning production, number 2 in the SEC. They're just unstoppable with the helmet communication, with year 3 as Jackson Dart as their starting quarterback. I don't know. We have got to stop this where Ole Miss is nothing but just a portal additions. It's more about what they're bringing back. And I've said that, I must have said that 50 times on this show this offseason, yet people are still not getting it. Would you agree with that, Stephen?
Let me help you out a little bit, Mike. Maybe it's quarterback. Like Miami is counting on a transfer quarterback, and Cam Ward started his career at Incarnate Word. He went to Washington State. Now he's at Miami. So he's been well-traveled and he's played in some different environments. So maybe he won't be, the Swamp is still going to be one of the toughest venues that they played in. Ole Miss has Jackson Dart coming back. Like, I think about Miami is counting on these guys to elevate them. And the same thing is true with Ole Miss. They're counting on them to elevate, but also like Walter Nolan, some of these guys are like more additive. They're not counting on like a quarterback to come in and say, you've got to be the guy. Like Jackson Dart's been there the last 2 years. He's been the guy. They're not counting on him. So I look at those two classes a little differently. You're counting on the quarterback as opposed to Ole Miss is sort of just trying to drop in the pieces to take this program to the next level.
Right. All right, so where are we at with your list, Stephen? Is it number 3 game?
Yeah, it's number 3, and it is Notre Dame at Texas A&M Saturday night in College Station. Notre Dame's offensive line is going to be the story on Saturday night because they are likely to start a true freshman at left tackle and a redshirt freshman at left guard. So you can imagine Mike Elko, Nick Scorton, Shamar Turner, Shamar Stewart have got to be very ecstatic about the makeup of Notre Dame's inexperienced, albeit very talented, offensive line. I think what's interesting to me about this Notre Dame team is the defense is outstanding. I think they could have 4, maybe 5 postseason All-Americans, one of the best defenses in the country. Not a lot of glaring weaknesses here. The offensive side is where the intrigue is. They have Riley Leonard taking over at quarterback, the Duke transfer. They've got Mike Denbrock, former LSU coordinator, calling the plays, and that inexperienced offensive line to go with those transfers that they brought in at receiver. So this is going to be a really tough assignment, I think, for Notre Dame to go into College Station. And one little nugget here, if you're Texas A&M, tell your coaching staff, do not kick the ball to Jaden Harrison, their receiver, kick returner. He's a preseason kick returner All-American at Notre Dame. He was at Marshall last year. He's one of the best in the country.
Well, this is a perfect opportunity, Stephen, and let me know if you disagree. But now I'm looking up that over-under. I just looked it up on my bookie, 46.5 points. Strong play, I would think, to bet the under in this football game with all the transition there for A&M, with the transition for Notre Dame on offense going into a very hostile Kyle Field at night, college game day. It generally seems like defenses are ahead of offenses right out the gate early in the season. Thoughts on that, Stephen? Again, head on over to mybookie.ag today. Sign up for a free account using that promo code THATSEC. But where would you lean with that 46.5 for that over-under points total for Notre Dame at Texas A&M?
I like a lower scoring sort of defensive battle here. I think Notre Dame's defense is good enough to keep them in it. Don't want to tip my hand too much. I'm not sure what's going to happen offensively yet. So yeah, I would probably log on to my bookie and grab that under before it goes any lower.
Yeah. All right. How about your number 4 most competitive game here, Steven?
Mike, let's go out to Vegas. It is USC and LSU. Another game that I have a lot of intrigue for, not totally sure what's going to happen here. This USC team kind of comes into the season, I don't want to say at a crossroads or sort of like fork in the road for Lincoln Riley, but they're at a really interesting point. Moving to the Big Ten, they've got a brand new defensive coordinator, Danton Lynn. You may remember him. He's been, was played in the NFL. He was the defensive coordinator last year at UCLA. Really solid defense last year at UCLA, second in the Pac-12 in scoring defense. And you just watch USC's defense last year. It was a disaster. Like, guys were out of place. They couldn't tackle, terrible angles, gave up too many big plays. They will be better coached on that side of the ball, and they do have some talent. So I think they will see some improvement there.
Sounds just like LSU.
Right. That's what I was going to say. These two teams are very similar on paper. And so I think what's going to be critical, like for USC, is like, how does this new defense look? And in tandem, you've got Garrett Nussmeier, you've got these new receivers, you've got an outstanding LSU offensive line going against a USC front, including Bear Alexander, that I think could be better this year. But on the other side, you've got a new quarterback for USC, Miller Moss, who looked great in the bowl game. If you want to have fun with small sample sizes, he was awesome. Can he continue that into this year? Also, Woody Marks, the former Mississippi State running back, he's at USC. Zachariah Branch, one of the best special teams receivers in the country. But the big question for USC is the offensive line. Moving into the Big Ten this year, it is a question mark, and I think that group may have some trouble on Sunday night against LSU.
Man, I had no idea Woody Marks is at Southern Cal. Last year, Dylan Johnson, Washington.
Yeah.
They don't know how good they had it with Mike Leach here. You know what?
Yeah, I think Woody Marks is going to have a pretty nice year in Lincoln Riley's offense. But, yeah, I mean, it's a funny thing how the transfer portal works, Mike, because there are so many guys you go down these teams and it's like, trying to, like, I guess, get the cork board out in the string and draw, arrows to wherever it was last year. So,
and then, well, I guess there may be one more that is somewhat competitive. What would be your number 5 game here, Steven?
I've got Clemson and Georgia at number 5. Already some pregame shenanigans here. Georgia's not going to release a depth chart. Dabo's not going to release a depth chart. He's not going to take calls this year at his coaching show. So all around good fun here. But, Clemson, if there's the biggest strength of Clemson is going to be that defense. They only have 2 returning starters, but still the next wave of standouts is ready to emerge. You look at guys like Peter Woods, TJ Parker through recruiting. You may remember their names. They're ready to be stars for this defense. But the big question for this Clemson team, it is the offense. They averaged around 24 points a game in ACC play last year. And that was Garrett Riley's first year as the play caller. So there's the hope that second year of a system, second year of starting for Cade Klubnik, a couple really highly touted freshman receivers, maybe that gets this Clemson offense going. I could see them being better. I think the problem is it's really tough to ask, I think, them to do it against Georgia in the season opener.
Mm-hmm. Do you possibly, though, Stephen, do you think this is the game that, similar to, I know there was really only one big-time game last week, but who had Georgia Tech winning? I saw the game day picker guy had Georgia Tech, but literally everybody else had Florida State. And I'm not, again, you can't compare that game to this game necessarily, but could this game be the one of the real opening weekend of college football that catches people the most off guard by the result, so to speak? Could you see? I mean, I'm talking, at least somewhat realistic. If Furman beats Ole Miss, that would be obviously stunning. But I'm saying of ones that are at least somewhat realistic.
I would be I should say you never say never on any of these games because it's the first week of the season. I would be pretty surprised. Like, I guess that would be sort of in that Clemson or that Georgia Tech beating Florida State thing. So I would agree with you. Like, that's probably in the same category. Georgia's, almost a 2-touchdown favorite, I think, for good reason. But if Clemson wins, that's like a big shocker, kind of like the Georgia Tech one was last week.
Right, right. Yeah. So again, don't revolt, Georgia. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I'm just saying, Clemson. This ain't your Papaw's Clemson. That was actually pretty good. This is a different version, but I'm just trying to hype up his game because looking at the rest of the schedule, Steven, I don't know if we're gonna have a competitive game among them.
I think you're probably right about that. I think, I will say, I think the next game on our list, Mike, Colorado State at Texas. Colorado State could be a fun team. They've got a good quarterback in Braden Fowler Nicolosi, one of the best in the Mountain West. A little bit turnover prone last year, but I think they're hoping that he takes a step forward. And also, if you like watching just good players, Torrey Horton, the receiver from Colorado State, preseason All-American. The reason I bring up the offense is because their defense has some question marks coming into this year. They gave up nearly 30 points a game last year. Their best defensive lineman went to the NFL. One of their projected starters is out for this game due to injury. I think probably two of their better players are actually at safety. And I bring that up because, like we talked about earlier, if you're Texas, you've got some opportunities here to kind of air things out against this Colorado State defense, work out the bugs before you go up to Michigan next week. So a favorable matchup, I think, for Texas offensively to sort of work things out before they go up to Ann Arbor next week in a big-time showdown.
Right, yeah.
Mike, I should say, too, that I think, Horton and Fowler Nicolosi, that's actually a really good test for Texas because of they gave up some yards last year in the pass defense. And so if you want to know, like, maybe an early test of like how good they are, this Colorado State passing game is pretty good. So it'll give you a good idea, I think.
Right, yeah. I think the only thing I could share, and this is of no value, but I remember watching them play Colorado last year, and all the fireworks were there. But they showed up for that game. But yeah, this certainly Oklahoma and Texas. I'm fascinated to see what they look like more so in the SEC. But just studying up week one, and even last year, if memory serves, I can't remember who it was against. Texas played. But in the opener, it was a team like this, and they struggled. I think it was Rice. The final score may have been lopsided, but it was, that gave me cause for concern, and then they turned around and whooped Alabama. So again, we should not overreact to week one, even though I do it every year.
Mike, I'm going to be guilty of it too. I keep writing it on every paper that I have, like, do not overreact, and here I am, ready to overreact after this weekend's games.
All right. So, any other games that could be slightly competitive here?
I'm stretching. Old Dominion at South Carolina. Here's the reason why. Old Dominion had one of the more memorable seasons, I think, by a team last year when I was kind of studying this offseason. They played 13 games last year. 11 of those were decided by one score. It was the ultimate high wire act every week. Some good, they played some of the better teams close. They also played Texas A&M Commerce to a 10-9 final, which would have been a really bad loss. You also may remember Ricky Rane. He's a former James Franklin assistant. He's the head coach up at Old Dominion. Jason Henderson, one of their linebackers, preseason All-American, but he is injured. He may not play in this game. He's had a knee injury dating back to last year. I bring him up because his stats are almost comical. Like, he had 186 tackles in 2022 and 170 last year. So to give you a better idea, they averaged about 24 points a game. They gave up 27. They had the ultimate close game thing figured out. So
and basically they got the water boy at linebacker.
Yeah, there you go. That's good. I didn't think about that. Yeah, he's a tackling machine. He's coming off, I think, a pretty serious leg injury, so I don't know if he's going to play. But I think the intrigue for me is getting a full game of this South Carolina offense, Lenora Sellers, seeing what they're capable of doing. Old Dominion's played a lot of close games. They're probably going to be a little bit better this year. Can they hang? Probably not. But if you want to stretch, there's kind of a stretch of a potentially close game.
Right. And, you want to talk about freak out level, Stephen.
Oh,
and
again,
not, they'll crush Old Dominion. But, there's always one or two of these, Stephen, that is tied at halftime or losing in the third quarter. Now, you may turn it on in the second half. Wasn't it trying to think, was it Alabama versus like UT Chattanooga one year where it was like tied at halftime and Alabama was like number 1 in the country. And of course they crushed them in the end, but there's always one of these, and there's going to be some major halftime freakouts by some fan bases. You know what?
I am ready. I have cleared off every tab on my computer. I am ready to go to somebody's message board and start reading these comments. So yes, there will be some freakouts, I'm sure.
All right. Who's next on your list here, Steven?
About Western Kentucky at Alabama. This is more about Alabama, seeing Kalen DeBoer's debut, seeing what the offense looks like under Jalen Milroe, how this team has adapted. Western Kentucky's a pretty solid Conference USA team. I've got them second in Conference USA this year. Old SEC friend TJ Finley, he's back. He was named the starter today for Western Kentucky. Also, Tyson Helton, former Tennessee assistant, is the head coach there. Also, we could continue like Will Friend, Tyson Summers, like it's like the SEC like all-star staff up there in Bowling Green. Also, I think in terms of individual matchups, Western Kentucky's secondary, especially at the cornerback spot, is pretty good, and so I think that may give us a good idea of like how Alabama's receivers are shaping up early in the season. Obviously, Alabama big favorite, and for good reason though.
Yeah. Whew. I said South Carolina freak out could be wild.
Yeah.
Alabama's would be just, man, I would pray for the crew over there at the Paul Feinbaum show if Alabama found a way to lose this one. You know what?
Gonna need to buy some more server space.
All right, how about who's next on your list?
You got Southern Miss at Kentucky. And again, these are kind of stretching here, but I think the intrigue is obviously at Kentucky. Like, what does Brock Vandegrift, what does this offense look like in the season opener? Southern Miss is coming off a 3-9 season last year. They've really kind of struggled to kind of find their rhythm recently. I mean, if you go back 10, 15, 20 years, they were a pretty consistent bowl team every year. Not the case recently. So they get their coach on the hot seat. They've got a new offensive coordinator. Another old SEC friend, Chip Long, is now the offensive coordinator at Southern Miss. New defensive coordinator as well. So also a ton of new, and they lost Frank Gore Jr. To the NFL. Likely going to start Tate Rodemaker at quarterback, the Florida State transfer. So a lot of new pieces for Southern Miss in Lexington. That's a really tough spot for Southern Miss.
Was that the guy that was the backup at Florida State, or was that the guy that was third string at Florida State?
He was the backup and started that game against Florida, got hurt, and then missed the ACC championship game.
Okay, man. So hard to keep up with all these quarterback transfers. You know what?
Yeah, like I said, we're gonna have to get the cork board and the string and drop it.
All right, who's next on your list here, Steven?
I'm really stretching here, Mike. There's no you want to talk about like a 5-alarm meltdown? If Oklahoma loses to Temple,
oh baby,
boy, would be a rough weekend, Norman. I've got Temple as the number 128 team in the country.
Wow.
Out of 134. You may remember Stan Drayton. He's a former SEC assistant. He's their head coach. They've really struggled. They lost Kurt Warner's son, EJ Warner. He was their starting quarterback to a transfer. They've got a first-time starter quarterback on the road in Norman. They gave up nearly 35 points a game last season. Their offensive line's a major question. I could keep going. This Temple team is really struggling, and Oklahoma is a huge favorite for good reason. By the way, I should note, if you want like an SEC connection to Temple, you may remember DeJuan Black, who played at Florida. Mm-hmm. He's one of Temple's better defensive players, but the list of knowns for Temple or strengths is pretty small right now.
And this should be quite the showcase game, I would think, Stephen, for Oklahoma. Friday night, nationally televised. So much intrigue with the Sooners coming into the SEC. I realize this is far from an SEC opponent, but if this game was on Saturday, I feel like very few SEC fans would watch it. Not because they don't want to watch this game, but because obviously their teams would be playing. So just the fact that this will be the only game in town for us SEC people, this will be a real opportunity to showcase the atmosphere and just Oklahoma being here and just ready for life in the SEC. I can't wait for it.
Totally agree, Mike. I think that's why I am ecstatic to have like Missouri playing on Thursday, Arkansas playing on Thursday, Oklahoma on Friday, sort of getting that showcase for 3 to 4 hours where you're not running into other games. You're not being overshadowed by Clemson and Georgia. So I think it's a great showcase opportunity. I mean, Oklahoma's a great fan base, great stadium. It's going to, I think with everything they have coming back on defense and the potential for this offense, it could be a really strong opener for Brent Venables this year. If it's not, there's bigger concerns here.
Right. All right. So what is the next? I won't even call competitive game.
Right.
What's the next game on your list?
Mike, it's Chattanooga at Tennessee. I think if you're tuning into this game, obviously you're a Tennessee diehard, but you obviously want to see what Nico looks like in his first kind of official start. Obviously, he started the bowl game, but now he's had a full offseason to work as the starter. Chattanooga played at Tennessee in 2019. They lost 45-0. They lost to Alabama 66-10 last year. They are a top 10 FCS team coming into the season this year. It's just hard to see this game being close, though.
Right. And is the coach there? Is it still Ty Simpson's dad?
It's a good question. I think it's Rusty Wright, I think is the...
Okay, I guess they moved on from that. No, I'm thinking UT Martin, my bad. So,
yeah,
it doesn't matter. They're going to get crushed. And this is, I don't know why, but Heupel loves to score 60, 70 points on these type of teams. I don't know if they'll score that many with their inexperience behind Nico. And again, I don't think you leave Nico out there for very long. Maybe pull him at halftime. But it's going to be a fun halftime while Nico's in there. You know what?
Yeah, I think it could be probably 35-0 pretty quick. If you're Tennessee trying to, get Nico some reps, get him out there early before you go to play a big game against NC State next week. So I would expect the Nico experience to be short, but also very productive.
And I'm slightly disappointed they didn't move this one to Friday or Thursday or something like that. There's just going to be so many games on. You know what?
Yeah, I would love to have another, I think that's the hard part about like the first week of the season. There's 16 games. Like, don't get me wrong. I'm never going to complain about college football coming back, but there's 96 games overall this week, 16 in the SEC. It'd be great to maybe space these out a little bit more so we could kind of enjoy kind of like seeing Nico on a Friday night, maybe after Oklahoma and Temple. But
right. All right. And then what's the next game on your list here?
Furman at Ole Miss. Furman is they're a top 25 FCS team coming into this year. They lost at South Carolina 47-21 last year. So pretty solid team, but they've got a lot of new faces, got to step in. They lost their quarterback to transfer. So if this one's close, it's not a great sign for Ole Miss, but it also is the first week of the season. So maybe we shouldn't overreact too much. But yeah, I think this is all about Ole Miss. Just win, take care of business, and no injuries as you move forward in your quest to make the playoff this year.
Right. It'll be similar to last year. Trey Harris came out, scored 4 touchdowns in the opener. Pull all the starters. You know what?
Yeah, I would expect, kind of like Tennessee, I would expect Ole Miss to get the backups in early, which is a good thing considering the expectations and potential playoff run this year.
All right, we're really scraping the barrel here, Steve. What is next?
Eastern Kentucky at Mississippi State, Mike. Eastern Kentucky was 5-6 last season, but we should note they did play Kentucky pretty close. They lost to Kentucky 28-17 last season. So they gave SEC teams a little bit of trouble, all things relative, last year. They are picked 4th in their conference, the United Athletic Conference. So to me, this is more about Mississippi State and seeing what this team looks like in Jeff Lebby's first game. What does Blake Shapen do? To almost the same thing that we talked about with Nico and Jackson Dart. Like, I think if you're Mississippi State, you go out there and you put on a show. You let Blake Shapen toss it around, put up some big numbers, get the guys out early in the third quarter. Doesn't look like they're going to have Kelly Akari or Corey Ellington, 2 of their better players, but still, I think kind of a showcase. A good way to start the Jeff Lebby era at a pretty favorable matchup against Eastern Kentucky.
I don't care who they don't got, Steven. They're not going to need him for this one.
True. They shouldn't need him.
All right, so we're down. We got lucky three here. Where are you going next?
Alabama A&M at Auburn. This Alabama A&M team lost to Vanderbilt by 34 points last season. They were 5-6 overall. So just on paper, not really going to present a ton of a tough test for Auburn. But this game is really all about watching Auburn, like seeing Peyton Thorne, seeing Cam Coleman, seeing the other freshman receivers, just seeing what this Auburn offense looks like and getting a chance to sort of showcase some of the improvement in a pretty favorable matchup is what I'll be watching for.
Yeah, so 60-point type game.
Yeah, I think so. Pretty one-sided, yeah.
So now we're down to the Thursday games, if I'm not mistaken.
That's right. Yeah. So the first one, Arkansas Pine Bluff at Arkansas. Of course, this game is over in Little Rock. Interesting tie between these two teams is that Alonzo Hampton is the head coach at Arkansas Pine Bluff. He was just at Arkansas a couple years ago in an off-field role. But at the same time, they were 2-9 last year. They got beat bad by Tulsa. I don't expect this game to be very close. I think the biggest thing for Arkansas is seeing what this new offense looks like with Petrino, Taylon Green at quarterback, working out some of the bugs because you got Oklahoma State up next.
So naturally, we're down to Mizzou.
Missouri. Yep. Mike, this should be an easy win for Missouri. Murray State was 2-9 last year, led by new coach Jody Wright. He was just at South Carolina last season, so kind of a new start for this program. But really, this is all about Missouri. I would expect Brady Cook, Luther Burden, forever as long as they play, big numbers, defense for Missouri, also a chance to get off to a good start against an opponent they should beat with relative ease.
No wonder they can't sell them tickets down there they're with this Murray State team.
It's a tough sell to sell Murray State the opener.
It's pretty much just come and pay for parking and pay for our concessions, please. You know what,
Mike? They missed the best opportunity. Cousin Shane at halftime, doing the drum before the game. However many times they could have brought people in. Yeah, would have been the best way to sell some more tickets, right?
Well, the best thing, Steven, is of course we are literally here. We're week one. Yeah. SEC football, 16 games. We're going to get starting Thursday, ending Sunday, because there's no NFL games, obviously. This first week of the college football season is finally here. And don't forget, Steven's going to be back Wednesday evening. So we're going to mix it up. I saw some people in the comments, why is Steven here? It's a Monday. It's not a Tuesday. Well, last season, Steven did Mondays, so we're shifting him back to Mondays to preview these games. And then next Monday, so we'll have all kinds of reactions, and we'll obviously preview week 2. And again, Steven's going to be here all season long on Wednesday nights to make his predictions for the upcoming season. But, man, how excited are you for that?
Man, I'm so excited to be here. I appreciate you and Cousin Shane letting me come on every week. I know, like Cousin Shane's the main attraction like every week. So I just try to be like the change of pace running back to like give him a break every now and then, because we're going to need him in November and December when we get deep into our playoff run. So, man, I'm just looking forward to it. I mean, like we talked about last week, this is such an unusual season with all the transfers and the playoff and the conference expansion. It is setting up to be, I think, one of the most anticipated, one of the best seasons we've going to have in some time. So I'm looking forward to it. Let's get this week 1 thing going on Thursday night, and let's get these games going on this weekend. I can't wait.
And, I don't want you to tip your hand any more than you already have probably during this show, Stephen, but I'm just curious. All right. Again, you don't have to don't reveal any of your picks or anything unless you're really wanting to go that far. But are there any games that you're still kind of debating at this point in time, or is it because it's week 1 you've had so much time to think about it? I'm just kind of curious if there's any games that you're still kind of uncertain about.
I think probably fair to say that the week 1 games, I've probably had too much time to think. And I might be like overthinking some of these. I think the Florida-Miami game is definitely the one that I'm still like trying to figure out, like, it's funny because I almost think I know who I like to win. I'm trying to figure out the path
Right.
to like figure out who, how to like talk myself into like confirming that pick. But yeah, I mean, I think for the most part, Mike, there's so many one-sided games with the FCS FBS thing. Some of these matchups, we know LSU's track record in the season opener, but this is a little bit more favorable matchup. So really, that Florida Miami game is the one probably keeping me up at night the most, as far as trying to figure out who I like and the path there.
Well, tune back in Wednesday night. Steven's going to reveal he's going to make a pick. Whether he wants to or not, he's going to have to give us a pick for each and every one of these games. Steven, before we close this one out, got any closing thoughts for all the cousins out there?
Yeah, I appreciate all of you guys watching every week. Love the interaction. Always feel free to reach out to me at Athlon Steven on Twitter, Steven L CFB over on Facebook and Instagram. Let's get this season going. Let's have the best college football season we can.
Absolutely. Well, Steven, I can't thank you enough for joining the show. I can't thank each and every one of you for supporting the channel. We just keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And as you could tell by the ads, that's because of you guys. Without you guys, there is no show. There is no ads. So thank you, thank you, thank you. We're going to work hard to make this the best season yet of that SEC podcast. We're working overtime here just for you guys. Just want to say thanks and get ready because SEC football is back. We'll catch you on the next one.